Video games are a common topic of conversation in unschooling circles because when it comes to questioning conventional advice, this topic is a hotbed of widely varying perspectives. For me, when I find myself in that conundrum, I look to my reality. What does it look like for me, for my kids, and for my family? And with this episode, I'm widening that a little bit to ask, what does it look like for other unschooling families? Here, I've brought together snippets of podcast conversations with both unschooling parents and with grown unschoolers. So right now, take a moment, maybe take a deep breath or two, and just release any preconceived notions or judgments that you might have right now and relax into your curiosity, into beginner's mind, where you can contemplate the question, what if? Just open up. So first, let's dive into the topic from the parent's perspective. In episode 179, Joan Concilio does a great job of unpacking the kinds of questions we ask ourselves when we choose to journey beyond conventional wisdom. Here's what she shared when I asked her about her experience with video games.
So I guess I would say, and I'm trying to think of the best way to kind of get into this. Our family has always been into gaming. Now, it wasn't always video gaming. I was like a classic Nintendo person growing up. Like, I love that. I have capped out at 2D, though. Like, I remember going and playing some video game in the arcade where you have to, like, walk diagonally over a bridge, 3D, to go into the building to kill zombies. And I died every time because I fell off the bridge. Like, I didn't get to the zombies because, again, no, like, proprioception, no physical sense in me. So I was like, okay, that's not for me. Still love classic Mario on my phone. It's great. But so we were a gaming family for a long time. We did Wii Sports together. I definitely was an early adopter for cell phones because I was using them at work a lot. We just were into things like that. I was doing computer things. I was working primarily online at one point. I had a full-time work job for a while. So that stuff was always just around us. It's part of what we did. We played board games too. So there's just a lot of stuff like that in our family. So for us, to sort of look at those things and say, what are the things around this that are arbitrary? That was kind of a next step as we started kind of unpacking things, because we definitely were all into them. And I think we even realized pretty early on that these were totally learning tools. We were learning things, Ash was learning things. But I think early on we still had some really arbitrary restrictions, like, well, you can't play a game for more than an hour on the Wii or something. Mm-hmm. Or, then we got a PS3 and it was, well, you can't play any games that have shooting in them or, whatever. And what we ended up with there was we really started to kind of unpack these ideas, and we're like, what is it that we're trying to get out? Like, what was our goal there? And our goal was like, well, we want you to be doing things that we feel are productive. I was like, well, wait a minute. So it's okay for me to sit around and play Candy Crush on my phone for a half hour in the morning instead of getting out of bed. But I'm like, I want you to be doing something productive 24/7. And also, who am I to judge what's productive or not? Like, so you start to like ask yourself these questions. And it was weird things that kind of came up out of video games naturally, stuff that just evolved for us that made us sort of not just be like okay with it, not just like, okay, we don't really have arbitrary restrictions around gaming time. Okay, we're pretty okay with most games. It wasn't just stuff like that. It was when we started to realize that these were not just a thing that we allowed, but they were an actual tangible benefit in our family that we were like, oh, right, this is cool. And I will say the biggest thing that tripped us on that in terms of like a light bulb going on was actually Ash really got into the Assassin's Creed series, which is, like you're like an assassin and you travel through time and you have to like save people and kill people and whatever. You explore these places and there were things that would come up, like you're exploring this thing and this kid in the game basically turns to the other kid. They're like looking at a display in a museum and it's like a helmet with horns. And the one kid says it's like a Viking. Oh, that's a Viking helmet. And the other kid turns to him in the game and says, Vikings didn't wear helmets like that. That's such a myth. And we went and looked that up and it totally that was like a 2-day thing of us finding out that like most Vikings didn't wear helmets with horns on them. I grew up thinking that, like, that's what you see. Like, it's a movie, Vikings. But so it was like things like that. And then we spent so much time going from that to what did Vikings, who were the Vikings? Where did they come from? What's that culture like? And you start to like go down these rabbit trails, and it's not the game by itself, right? The game by itself was just the entry point into that. There are games that are designed to be educational, but I always said like math with robots is still math. Like that's, you have a kid who really hates math and you're not like, oh, you gussied it up with some robots, and you're like, yeah, it's not gonna do it for him. But there are cool games that are legitimately by themselves educational. There's the Dragon Box app, which is actually an algebra. There's an algebra version and a geometry version, but it absolutely plays like a game, and it doesn't beat you over the head with, now look, you've done, distributive property and algebra. So it things like that are good and they help, but they're part of a context. They're part of like, okay, what did you see here? What is that, what can we explore? One of the newer Assassin's Creed has this, it's a mode that you don't even like go through and kill people or anything. It's an exploratory thing. You can walk inside actual replicas of like the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids in Egypt. And it tells you all this stuff. Like, this is where the tomb was. This is whatever. For like King Tut. Excuse me, I'm going to grab a drink. Thank you. So like you get to see these things. And again, the benefit to that, so that's cool on its own. But where we really got benefit from that was not just we're going to park Ash in front of the TV for 8 hours and be like, here, go at it. We don't care. It was engaging with him with that stuff and saying, like, I see that you're really interested in this. Tell me about like what you're doing here. And he would be like, I'm exploring this house because I need to find this person, but the house is full of like artifacts from different like archaeological expeditions. And this is what's here. And I was like, well, what does that say about that, suit of armor? And he'd go read it and like, we'd talk about it. And so it was really a chance for us to have something that he really enjoyed. There was a chance for us to connect and to just like put some topics in his path where he was like, oh, like, this is a really cool thing to like dive into more. But that only happens with that connection. Excuse me. If you're just kind of ignoring your kids and your hands off and you're saying like, go do whatever, that's not the same thing. And we eventually realized that many of the things that are considered like school subjects, we were seeing, covering, experiencing through video games, down to Wii Sports as far as phys ed. Like Asher was doing more activity through Wii Sports than any of us in the family had done for months.
I loved hearing how Joan unpacked her concerns around gaming and discovered how rich they've been for learning. Her experience leads us to wonder, what if video games can be a window to the world? So keep that in mind as we listen to this story from Sylvia Woodman from episode 109.
My son, Harry, loves video games like that. Like, if we had to describe what we were doing with curriculum, his curriculum is video games, right? Mm-hmm. For many months, he was very, absorbed in the world of Fallout 4, which is one of these, post-nuclear apocalypse terrains. And mm-hmm. there are missions, but there's also a sandbox kind of feature where you can kind of do your own thing in it. But there, it's sort of the storyline is sort of like, what if World War II had gone the other way? What if we were the ones that had gotten the nuclear bomb and things, had fallen apart and people are scavenging and there's radiation and whatever. But also, what if time had sort of stopped then? So and this is like a kind of very minor detail of the game, is that there is a radio station and you can turn the station and there's different music. And most of the music is from the 30s and the 40s. And my son became really enamored with big band music. And his favorite song on the playlist was Anything Goes. Mm-hmm. So naturally I said to him, oh, do you know that that's actually a musical? And then we were driving around town and it turns out that one of the local high schools, that was their spring play. Mm-hmm. So then I said, oh, do you want to go see Anything Goes? And then it turns out that, oh, one of his friends from karate is playing in the pit band. Oh, okay. So we got tickets and we went. And I thought, okay, well, we'll go. I don't know if they'll like it. Maybe we'll leave an intermission, because Anything Goes is like the finale to the first act. So I thought, oh, well, we'll go. We'll see Anything Goes. We'll say hi to his friend in the pit, and then we'll go home. But they were totally involved in the story, and they wanted to stay for the second act, and they loved it, and they had such a good time, and so that was sort of an unexpected turn from playing video games. Like, not everybody would make the connection that, oh, if my kid plays video games, we might get to go see musical theater.
I love hearing stories about how video games have led to so many other things. And the music connection is one that most of us don't even think of, certainly at first. Now, in episode 134, Virginia Warren shares her epiphany around the breadth of the video game experience when I asked her to share her perspective on video games.
Well, my husband and I both have loved video games since we were children. We're a little early on that, but we both, not only grew up loving video games and playing video games as much as we could, we both became, computer professionals. So, I don't work outside the home anymore, but my husband goes to work all day and works on computers and comes home and plays on computers. And everyone in my family likes games. My older daughter gaming is definitely her main interest. My younger daughter loves games, but it's not her primary interest. And when she chooses a game, it's more about who she gets to play with than what game it is. Mm-hmm. It's more of a social experience for her. And she spends a lot of time doing digital art also, and analog art. And here's a specific story. My daughter, Lydia, my older daughter, is very, very, very into Pokemon. And the amount that she knows about the Pokemon universe, the Pokemon themselves, the lands, the history of the company Game Freak and the creator of the original Pokemon game and how he used to catch bugs in Japan when he was a child. Like, she's her I like to say that her knowledge of Pokemon is not encyclopedic, rather it is Pokédextrous. But there was still, Pokemon hit in 1996 when I was, I was like 4 years out of high school. So I was 22. I didn't get into Pokemon when it first came around. If I had been a kid when Pokemon came around, I feel pretty sure it would have been my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something I was into. It wasn't something that I knew anything about. It wasn't the type of game I really liked anymore. And there was still a part of me inside that at the same time I was going, wow, I can't believe how much she knows about this topic, how deep her interest is, how firmly lodged in her mind all of these facts are. But I still had this snotty part of me that was like, oh, I wish that she would be interested in something real. Or, I don't know. And I was having this crappy thought one day, and I don't know why it was any different than it ever is, but I was finally able to perceive the fact that interest, Pokemon is real. It employs thousands of people. It creatively fulfills artists and musicians and computer programmers and writers who create it. It's a work of art. It creates jobs. Tons of people make money. Tons of people have fun. Even if there was nothing else good about it than all the pleasure that it's brought to people, it would still be wondrous. And it's done so much more. And that's just one game.
I love that. Video games really are a window to so many things in the world. Now, let's go back to episode 8, the second Q&A roundtable, and a concern I've seen expressed pretty regularly over the years. Here's the question we received from Jamie. I have been getting the message that if I continue letting my kids play video games as much as they like, then they won't have any imaginations or they will lose their creativity. Where's the proof? Now, I'll start with this one because I don't. I was just curious. The question is, where's the proof that they will be losing their creativity imaginations? Well, I don't agree that they will be. And I certainly don't see any proof of that in my own children. If anything, it was just fodder for all their creativity and imaginations. I think if you flip it though, maybe the people that she's talking to think they too are seeing proof of it in their own children because their children may be using video games and TV and stuff more as an escape from all the expectations and things that they have to do with their days. So they are using it to zone out. So they may look like, kind of they're turning off or they're losing their imaginations and everything when they're playing with that from that perspective. But that's not the mindset that unschooling kids bring to those activities.
Yeah,
Somebody else want to jump in?
I just think that is a really important point, and I think that's kind of where people think they're looking at the same thing, but it's really so different because what we saw was really what you said. Like I saw them, engrossed in video games and television, and then you would see how it would just this rich play would develop from that outside other places in their writing, in things they would be doing, stories they would be telling. And it was really just fodder. But again, they weren't needing to escape from difficult day at school or from other things like that, which, I've been known to use TV for that. I love watching TV and it is kind of a time of quiet for me. It's like I'm just sitting, I don't have any responsibilities, I'm engrossed in the story. And so I felt like my kids used it very differently than even I did. But yeah, so I thought that's an interesting point.
I've never been anything but in complete awe watching my children play video games. They're mine.
Yeah.
And if anyone took the time to nurture and encourage their child's interest in video games and jump in and talk to them about it, look at the magazines with them about it, listen to their victory stories and their frustration stories, they would also walk away just feeling completely impressed with their brains. And I bring that up all the time because being a library director, I get parents dropping comments about stuff. There was a child in yesterday with a handheld and the mother said something about, how he should put it away and everything. And I just always say, I'm so impressed with the child's brain that they can do what they're doing on these games. So that's one way that I always looked at it. And the whole proof thing, like you were saying, I'm not sure if she was looking for proof that it was deteriorating the creativity and imagination, or looking for proof that it wasn't. But, the thing, there is no proof in anything besides what we see and feel in our own children. Right. And that comes from a place of trust and being involved in their amazing passion with them and being a part of joy with them. And that's how we can see the full richness of it instead of just the outside surface view of it. Jacob and Sam are 21 and 25 and it's still happening. I mean, it's been happening their whole lives. And every time they get together, it's still their point of connection. And they go off in this other world that, is just amazing to me with their language and their, conversations and everything. And most of all, for me, it's a beautiful thing to see that this is how they connect each other, even as young adults. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I have a friend, Pat, whose son is very into video games and Pokemon and things like that. And one of the things I love about her is that because this does come up a lot with people asking, they've just this focused interest in be it a game or Pokemon, she is so excited about it because she has spent that time and has engaged with her child doing that she just, suddenly becomes telling them what an amazing world it is and how complex it is and how it's impossible to remember all the things. But yet these kids know all the different Pokemon and all the different things. And her enthusiasm really sets the stage, I think. So I think that's really helpful tool for parents to just realize, share that joy that your kids have, be involved with it, be able to share it with other people. And you'll see kind of this, from other parents, like, gosh, I never knew that about it. Or, yeah, I never really thought about that piece. And so sometimes that's a helpful tool.
And one other piece that I find really interesting is the idea of creativity, too, because creativity isn't coming up with random ideas out of nowhere.
Right.
Creativity is taking in so many things from around you and then finding new connections, finding new ways to look at things. So when they're playing and when they're watching and when they're doing all these things, they're bringing in new pieces that are going to, be fodder that they can use for their creativity, not dampen it.
Right, absolutely.
And because it's coming into themselves and who they are, it's going to come out as their expression of it. And, much of Jacob's art is inspired by video game art and everything. And that's, what he always loved first and foremost. So I know no other thing that expands my kids' imagination and creativity more than video games.
So many unschooling parents I've spoken with have had that same experience. Playing video games has been inspiring for their children in so many ways. Now, I've pondered this idea for a while, and I think that maybe we get thrown off because one of the first ways many of us approach learning is to copy things we like. We try to draw the art we like, write like the stories we like. Kids act out the scenes they see, and so on. So at first, it may look like they aren't being imaginative, but really, that's about learning the foundational skills. That's about having something concrete to compare our progress against along the way, to guide us. But soon we take off those metaphorical training wheels, and games are an amazing playground of inspiration. So now, let's go to episode 68 and my conversation with Terry DeMarco. It's a wonderful episode focused on technology in general, but I thought I'd pull out our discussion around another concern I see mentioned regularly. A child getting upset when they're asked to stop playing a video game. So often we're quick to blame the game, but is that what's really going on?
So I think it was because I was in sales for my career, but I'm really good at putting myself in other people's shoes. And I've always kind of done that. So, and I know when I'm in the flow and I'm doing something, doing research or a task that I particularly enjoy, I bristle at interruptions. Sometimes I'm, nice about it. Sometimes I'm not so nice about it. But it doesn't take much to realize that kids are having the same thing, right? And I think that it's even worse if the limit's arbitrarily assigned, right? Oh, you've had your hour, right? So, because that just seems, number one, I never impose a rule on my children that I wouldn't want imposed on myself. And that's been a good guide marker for me. But I also think that, we've always had the rule here that when we're transitioning into something else, like if we do have to go to a dentist appointment or go do something, my kids are always allowed to finish what they're doing before we move. So it requires me to be a little bit more, ahead of the game, like give them a half an hour or 45 minutes notice that, we have something coming up. But we always have given them the respect to say, hey, finish what you're doing. So they can finish the game, they can finish the project, they can finish the call, whatever it might be. And we're pretty flexible with that. So we tend not to see a lot of anger coming off when we do have to come off. But we also, our kids really manage their own time on computers. So, at least I understand where that comes from. But again, I think this comes back to deschooling, right? Really thinking about, instead of just assuming, I think the only people who might say, hey, my kid's addicted to this are people who already have issues with the use of technology in their house. So, and I think that, again, we chatted about it before, but if I have an agenda, or if I have an energy about the use of technology, my kids feel it. And I don't have to say a word, but they get it, right? So I think we have to own our own energy. But, the values in our society are about balance and moderation. And technology generally, when you see it used by kids, is not that, right? They tend to deep dive and are very happy and joyful. So, I think that for those of us who are brought up with balance and moderation as kind of a family value, we get uncomfortable with excess. Excess in anything, excess in food, excess in joy. When kids are too happy, I think people get uncomfortable sometimes, right? And I think that, kids are just trying to figure out, they always want to come to the stasis of joy, right? Or happiness. Yeah. And they'll get there sometimes even, they'll force themselves there because they always seem to want to get to that equilibrium. And if we just let them get there, they chill out, they relax a lot. So
that's a cool way to look at it. Yeah, that's true. And when you think about it too, because technology, there was a couple of things, because technology is so new to us even, right? As adults, we didn't grow up with it. We can even take those messages around us of balance and fear of too much technology and slam ourselves with it too, right? So part of this, at least part of it for me, was first coming to terms with it in my own use and realizing, no, I'm choosing this because, and I'm getting A, B, C, D out of it. And then this is what I'm doing. And the other piece is, when we talked about, screen time in general, how that is composed of so many different things, is also realizing that, okay, yeah, you could say screen time and you could say hours, but, I was communicating on my phone. So I was texting with my kids, because my kids are older, and maybe I was watching a DVD for some research and, looking up recipes on the computer. Like, we're using it now for so many different things that's one of the challenges of putting it all under this misnomer of screen time, because then all of a sudden it looks powerful, right? Rather than taking a moment to actually dive in and recognize all the multiple ways that we're using different technology.
Well, right. And I think, I have, and I don't see maybe this much in the unschooling space, but in the conventional world where parents are sitting on their computer and yet telling their kids they can only use an hour. And I'm always like, I think that's disingenuous, right? That we shouldn't have double standards, that if I truly have an issue with my children using technology, then I should really be owning how much I'm using it. But I also think that greatness comes from passion, right? And I've met, through my husband, and because I think he works in his passion, and he has many friends who also are somewhat passionate about what they do. And they all tend to excel at the things that they're passionate about. And I think greatness comes from passion. And passion in general, when you meet someone who has had great success or is very passionate, they rarely have balance. Right. I don't see many, you don't see like Michael Jordan, basketball player. I doubt he had a lot of balance in his life. Right. Yeah. Or a lot of moderation. And from what, Carol Dweck says in her book, he practiced basketball all the time. Right. And I see that, with Ed, he codes a lot, he's on the computer a lot. It's just what he does, but he's really good at what he does, right? And I think when I've met people, musicians who are really good at what they do, they play their instrument a lot. So if my children are going to be really good at technology or really good at researching and learning from technology, then they're probably going to spend a bunch of time on it. It's important to respect it. Because in disrespecting it, you then end up sending the message that you disrespect the child. And I think that's not worthwhile in any family, but certainly not in unschooling families. Yeah.
And over the years, I've never found balance to be something that was really useful as a goal because balance seemed to be a framework I was trying to put on top of myself or my kids, right?
Right.
Whereas
it tamps down joy, right?
yeah, exactly. If we did instead follow our joy, oh my gosh, everything was always so much better. We were so much more engaged. We were just having so much more fun, and trying to put balance on top of that just really screwed it all up, right? So
Yeah.
it's and that's why I ended up, calling my website Living Joyfully, not Living Balanced Lives.
Exactly.
It's such a wonderful mindset shift when we realize that our children are people too, and being interrupted can be frustrating, especially when we're in the flow and engaged in our passionate interest. So now let's shift and hear from some grown unschoolers about their experience with video games. First, let's visit with Xander McSwan. Xander left school in the 5th grade when his parents, both education professors, decided the best thing they could do was pull their kids out of school and start unschooling. I asked him how his passion for gaming developed.
For me, there were, I think, sort of two really big things that made me sort of go, wow, when I discovered gaming. And one part of it was influence from family. My cousins on my mom's side were really big video gamers, and they were, I think, between like 5 and 10 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And in my eyes, they were just like the coolest people that could walk the earth. And so when they would visit, we would all sort of play together on our computers, whether it was like Warcraft 3, or sometimes my cousin would let me play Ratchet and Clank on his PS3 and or PS2, I think it was at the time. Anyway, so there was this sort of social element where these like really amazing people were showing me this really beautiful and artistic world that I could dive into, and it was initially this really social experience of getting to sort of play in it. Like you can almost, I think at first I thought of it as like a board game that just was so three-dimensional. And like there was so much sort of complexity and depth that I was diving into, and I was sort of collaboratively engaging with it with these people that I just really admired. So that was, I think, a huge component for me, and that continued to be an emphasis on how I engage with gaming throughout my life, was that really social component. Mm-hmm. The other piece of it I want to elaborate more on is, I think that a lot of that sort of growth process, especially right around the age where I left school, I think I was maybe 10 and up and through maybe 15 or 16, is this really sort of intense like period of trial and error of like seeing what it looks like to go into this strange circumstance and how that sort of reacts. And to someone of that age in particular, video games are this incredible opportunity because they offer this expansive sort of set of possibilities that you can explore. And the way the game sort of, so you, in a lot of these games, I don't know how many listeners have played video games before, so I'll maybe go a little bit basic, but in a lot of games, you're sort of, there's an avatar in the game representing you. And there's this really powerful state of immersion where sort of while you're playing the game, it's not necessarily that you, like in your head, you aren't thinking of yourself as looking at a screen, making sort of dots fly across. You are that character. You know, and often, like, I think there can be a similar experience if you're reading a really good book. Yeah, like you kind of become that character. Mm-hmm. And there's, I think, a similar sort of growth where, for me, when I was a kid reading stories, a lot of it was like, oh my God, what that would feel like to be this character in this book on this great adventure. And then all sort of like the growth of feeling into that archetype and seeing what happens. And then video games introduce this whole new element to that, where not only are you experiencing this like incredible story from sort of a first person perspective, you are also making the choices about where the story goes.
Exactly.
So you get to choose for yourself what the most like creative thing you can think of is to do, and then you get to see what the results of that are. And I want to clarify, there's sometimes more to it than like, so let's say I'm in a game and it's like some kind of combat game. It's not necessarily that I am playing with the possibility of like fighting some guy on the street and seeing how that turns out for me, and then applying that to fighting someone in real life. It's, I think, more meaningfully seeing sort of which parts of myself I want to dive into and explore. And which parts of myself I want to grow, and sort of which aspects of that archetype of a hero and which parts of their story and their pain I can really relate with, and how that all feels. And I think that really supports, like, especially emotional growth and an understanding of sort of what it means to be human through living all of these stories through so many different eyes in such rapid succession.
And especially, too, you can even replaying the same game. And I know my son would talk about doing different way playthroughs, making different choices, like taking on different personas, trying them on, seeing what happens to them through the same kind of story, but seeing how it plays out differently. And yeah, that's totally. It's a fancy, wonderful way to just explore. Like you were talking about exploring within the game too, and exploring just all the different perspectives that you can even play through sometimes in the different players' perspectives. You can approach your playthrough, with a different mindset. Oh, what if, and it's even like exploring that mindset for yourself, right? I want to play this. Like if I thought I was going to be like a superhero, what choices would I make here? If I thought I, wanted to become the villain, what choices would I make? And yeah, it's so in depth, isn't it?
Totally. And it's so powerful. Like I really want to reiterate that, like, especially in, I think, a really good game, one of the things that me and my brother, who also love video games, would love doing was to go through a story as sort of the hero, and experience sort of the conflict from that perspective, and be trying to make these really like morally righteous choices and save everyone and help the world. And then also to finish the game and then go back through it from the villain's perspective, or like play as the bad guy. And I think in a good game, it'll really be apparent. Like you'll have the same sense of immersion as that villain, but you'll be like experiencing all sort of the like pain that the villain's in that leads to these like really harmful choices that the villain's making. And I think it gives this really broad understanding of conflict as a whole, which is so cool.
I love that, because a well-drawn, well-created villain, believes he's the hero of his story, right? So as you said, he has all these conflicts, all these things going on. It's just such a way to realize that our perspective isn't the only one, right? What a way to explore that, even in our conversations and engagement with other people, they have different perspectives. It brings that home so clearly, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think one of the really powerful things about video games is being able to sort of take this, what's usually a linear storyline, and pull it apart to this like hyper complex, like sort of sphere of conflicts and sub stories, and look at it from all different angles and get to just really fully experience that story as like an example of what it means to be human.
Later in our conversation, I asked Xander about things he's learned through gaming that continue to be relevant in his life now. What threads does he see as he looks back?
So one of the big ones for me is what we already talked a little bit about, which is conflict and perspective. Mm-hmm. Today I work as a sort of a mediator, and I work with sort of conflict and emotional wellness, and do a lot of sort of restorative justice work. And I think a lot of that was something I got to really, like, the same sort of consciousness of being able to look into this really sort of delicate connection between two humans and see both perspectives and like value the needs expressed by the actions of each person. And I think that it's so similar to what I got to engage with as a kid, seeing stories play out from two different perspectives and getting to really put myself into the shoes of both the villain and the hero. So that for me was a really huge one. Mm-hmm. And I think also the big one was, like I said, that love for adventure and love for independence.
Yeah.
I noticed I was so happy in games where I got to, like, carry almost nothing with me and go. Like, I was just so fascinated with just the concept, the idea that this person could have, like, enough food for a few days. If I sort of, like, break down what's happening in sort of reality if an adventure going forward, this person had, like, a backpack with some stuff and
off they go.
like a few possessions and a little bit of food, and they just go, you know?
Yeah.
And if I ignore the parts about, like, fighting goblins, that sort of core component of there being this person looking for adventure and, like, not needing anything but themselves and what they have, and going and finding finding the biggest meaningful and sense of purpose in contributing to the world that they can with whatever they can bring, was so cool. Yeah, I think, like I said, I went on this long adventure when I was sort of coming into adulthood. Now I really love minimalism. It's mostly, I think, as a way of engaging with environmentalism, but I love sort of trying to see how much I can contribute to the world with as little as I have. So that's kind of one of the subtle things I think came from me. And then with that, just that love of, like, exploration and adventure and looking for ways to help people. I ended up in my life like going on a little bit of an unconventional route, which I'm sure is conventional for unschoolers to do. I skipped college, and I work in an unusual job, and I spend, I think, like, slightly more time than I spend working professionally, volunteering. And for me, I think a lot of that comes from this part of myself that I got to express through video games, of being really committed to helping people and, like, having the most important thing be a sense of purpose and contribution.
Xander's story and how he sees his passion for gaming growing up weaving into his life now is so interesting, isn't it? And along that vein, I wanted to share this insight from Max Vernoy in episode 159. Max grew up unschooling and is now a full-time karate instructor. We were talking about how we learn so much about ourselves through following our passions, and he spoke about how much he learned through gaming as a teen.
I'm going to sidetrack away from karate for a little bit.
Sure.
When I was a teenager, I played a lot of this online game called Final Fantasy XI, and that was a huge part of my life, to the point where I played it pretty much like a part-time job, and I got very involved with the end game, the highest level of content in the game. and eventually grew to become a leader of the Link Shell in that game, which is basically the guild system similar to World of Warcraft and other games have. And leading that group and organizing these events and planning times for them and running and managing people, all those were skills that I didn't really think about as I was going through it. And all the things I ended up doing in that game as a leader ended up transferring very nicely into my role as a karate instructor now. And those were skills that I didn't think about at the time, but that really shaped and let me become who I wanted to be. I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to be in charge, and I wanted to run things. And that was a great way to kind of see how that developed.
I love the thread Max drew from being a guild leader in an online game to being a karate instructor. Now let's hear from Alec Trossett from episode 141 about where his passion for gaming has led him. I asked him about his interests growing up.
So I was always focused on basically one thing at a time. And when we started Unschooling, for me, that was gaming. So I grew up gaming a lot. And as soon as I had the freedom to, I did it a lot. And a lot of people look at that and they say, wow, I can't believe, your childhood was spent mostly gaming. And aside from that, I also loved to play the drums, loved music. But gaming really was the main big interest for me. And I think the main reason is it provided a challenge for me. I sought out games that challenged me, that made me think, and basically puzzles to solve, right? And, that kind of ties into my eventual interest in math. But I was turned off from math at a very young age because I was forced to learn it in this way. And, it did not happen naturally. And it was this artificial construct that, is being shoved in my face that, it works this way because I tell you it works this way. And I wasn't viewing it as a puzzle. But video games at the time, they were puzzles, challenges, things for me to accomplish, things to challenge me mentally. I was never the type to get into sports. I never enjoyed challenging myself physically. That's not, even when I'm drumming, I'm just like, I wish I could play faster. That's like the limitation. I don't want to put in the physical work to play faster because I like challenging my head with the more technical aspects of it. But so I loved being challenged mentally, challenged through, basically anything. So video games were the best way for me to do that. Reading books, that was too passive for me. Watching television, which, I enjoyed, I didn't do it as much because, again, it didn't engage me. I wasn't the one making the decisions. I wasn't the one solving the problems. And so, that was a very formative thing for me, even though video games get a very, very bad rap in a lot of circles. I think that's improving. I think people are seeing that really it's just a book that has a higher level of interaction and challenge at times. But
yeah, I think, that would be a great thing, that you mentioned to speak to a little bit is because that's what I saw with my eldest son too. Because I remember having video games discussions with your mom many years ago.
Well, I remember I played some video games with him briefly when we saw each other.
Oh yeah, ago. That's right too. But Halo that is the that's the joy, right? But there's so much analytical thinking, like as you talked about puzzles and the mental challenge of figuring it out, of figuring things out, whether it's, even math, arithmetic on the fly, right? Figuring out levels and hit points and all that kind of stuff. But the actual analytical thinking that goes into it just to figure out the puzzle, even if it's not a literal puzzle in the game, the puzzle of how to go through from one place to the next, etc., and go from level to level. There's really so much learning in there, isn't there?
Yep. And that's something that is lost on a lot of critics of video games, I think. And, when I say, oh yeah, I grew up playing lots of video games, people are like, oh, that's what unschooling is, huh? You just play video games. It's like, but it's not just playing video games. That's
one of the things that we talk about so much is, or we suggest is try playing yourself.
Exactly.
A little.
Yeah. And unless you're playing, and let me tell you, my dad does that. My dad plays games. He likes a game called Snood, which is where you're shooting little things up and making things match. It's like one of those, almost like a Bejeweled type of thing. And like, I can't play those. I can't play games like that because they are kind of just mindless relaxation.
Yeah.
And he admits it, and it's cool. It's cool to have a mindless outlet like that. But like, if I had been doing games like that all day when I was growing up, I would have been bored out of my mind. So,
well, yeah, you wouldn't have chosen that. That's the whole idea,
exactly.
right? Between being free to choose what you're doing. Like people think, oh, if the kids are free to choose, they're just going to choose mindless activities. They won't challenge themselves. They won't choose things that, take their mind to the edge of their processing capabilities, push them further, even if it's a physical, interest that they have, same deal. Why would they bother? But that's something we think that's human, but really that's something we learned growing up on our own, and unschooling kids don't learn that, right?
Right, exactly. It's
where they move past
that's an attitude that's developed from being forced to do challenging activities that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
The difference is, are you challenging yourself with things you are enjoying versus challenging yourself with things that have been assigned to you?
Those are worlds apart, aren't they? And later in our conversation, Alec talked about when he made the connection between his love for puzzles in games growing up and his interest in math.
My first semester, I had a very, very influential and inspirational math instructor who, he talks about, I was Alec's first math instructor ever in his life because, and I told him that eventually and talked to him about that. So, it was a very, very formative experience for me. And he was able to teach math not as, this formulaic, procedural thing where you learn an algorithm and you follow the algorithm and you get your answer, but rather as, a puzzle, as something where you need to figure out how it works in order to solve a problem.
Alec graduated from UVA with a bachelor's in math and has been accepted into their doctoral program. He plans to ultimately teach math at the university level. So, are you guys seeing a pattern here? Well, let's go to episode 180 with Nick Bergson-Shilcock. Here's his answer to my question, what were some of the bigger interests of yours growing up and how did you pursue them at the time?
Yeah. So for a long, an early period of my life, I really just enjoyed playing outside. I built a log cabin and played in the woods with my friends. And I always really enjoyed building things. And then around the age of, I think about 10, I discovered that I could also build things on computers. Initially, I was really interested in video games. And so the first things that I wanted to do were learn how to program and build my own computer games, which started really just playing around with an old Apple IIe that I got at a garage sale for $20 or something, and starting to just explore that system on my own. And then before too long, I realized that I actually enjoyed the programming even more than just the video games. And so my interest shifted towards both programming and also a lot of digital electronics. And that was an interest that stuck with me throughout my whole preteen years and teen years, all the way up through college, and now continues to my work at the Recurse Center.
Nick founded and runs the Recurse Center in New York City, a self-directed, community-driven retreat space for both new and experienced programmers to take a sabbatical and vastly improve their programming skills. So they had their first batch of participants way back in 2011. And last fall, they moved to a new and larger space. Just so you know, you can check out some pictures of the new location on the transcript page for that episode. And finally, let's go to last week's episode, number 181, with Jack and Sean O'Brien, and hear how they answered the same question about their interests growing up unschooling.
So I think a lot of what I was able to do, being unschooled, I just played a lot of video games for like a really long time, and I got really into that. And I don't think I was able to sort of realize the value of that until more recently. But I eventually sort of got bored of just sitting around playing video games, and that's when I went to Massanutten Technical College or Technical School, Technical Center. That's the one. That's I took an animation class there. And so looking back on that, I think that's really like a way that I was able to pursue my interests into something beyond video games. But even like aside from that, I think I just played a lot of games, and I think that was actually really, really beneficial because it was nice to just get to do what I wanted. I think I actually learned a lot from that whole experience.
Mm-hmm. If I can jump in on the video games thing, that'll be most of my answer probably. But I think that was, so it was just an interest and it was fun, obviously. But I really do think it was a way to challenge ourselves, which was a big thing. Because when you're unschooled, you don't have the daily, the homeworks and like all, like the constant like work necessarily. Right. And it was this really like fun and natural way to challenge ourselves and kind of use our brains and just like do different puzzles and different stuff like all the time and in fun ways that actually interest us. And then like Sean was saying with going to MTC, how that was kind of like then a continuation of like,
it was like the next step.
Yeah. Of that natural interest. And I think for me, I kind of started getting into a lot of games where I would work with people online and I would get in teams online and like do a lot of like communication. I was just like picking up so much about like talking to people and like how to like get my team to work together and stuff. And then that's totally gone into like what I want to do now is like, I'm interested in psychology and like people and like just, communication and all of that is like such a passion of mine now. So I think like video games, just the breadth of things you can do in video games and different, I don't know, there's so much.
There's like something for everyone.
Yeah. It'll feel like it'll lead into just about every skill or like practical skill. Yeah.
I love that. And I think they nailed it. I think video games really are a wonderful window to the world, a fun and engaging way for people, for children, to explore their interests. In just the handful of conversations that I've shared here, we've heard from parents who've seen it in action, and we've heard from unschooled kids about how they've discovered interests in art and animation, psychology and communication, math, computer programming, leadership, and storytelling through their love of video games. Even though they didn't know at the time where their gaming might go, they were following what they were fascinated by and enjoying their days. As unschooling parents, when we focus on supporting our children as they follow their interests and passions, including video games, they learn so much about themselves and the things they want to do in the world. I hope you found this compilation interesting, and I wish you a wonderful week.